Chers collègues, l'ordre du jour appelle la présentation et la discussion du rapport de M. Michael Astrup-Jensen au nom de la Commission de suivi pour le respect des obligations et engagements des États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, intitulé « L'évolution de la procédure de suivi de l'Assemblée, janvier-décembre 2021 ». Je vous rappelle que nous devrons en avoir terminé avec l'examen de ce texte, vote inclus, à 12 heures. Le rapporteur dispose de 7 minutes pour la présentation de son rapport et 3 minutes pour répondre aux orateurs à la fin de la discussion générale. La parole est à M. Michael Astrup-Jensen. You have the floor, Michael.
Thank you so much, Chair, and also congratulations on your new election on Monday as being our new president of this assembly. As you know, this is actually the highlight, so to speak, of my 2-year term as chairman of the Monitoring Committee, a post I actually put on just before COVID-19 hit us all. And therefore, the 2-year term has, of course, been somewhat special and has also, of course, made our work of monitoring the different countries somewhat difficult. But even though I actually would like to congratulate the rapporteurs especially, but also the committee as a whole, for even though we had the COVID-19 pandemic, we have still been able to monitor the different countries. And the result of that is actually put forward in my draft for the progress report. And there are some positive acknowledgements. We have especially seen positive developments in some countries, as I put forward, but I would especially highlight some of the shortcomings because I think they are the most important ones, because there's still work to do. And if we start in no particular order with a country like Turkey. Turkey is extremely problematic developments. We have especially seen the Kavala case, that even though there are clear-cut court case from our court, the authorities in Turkey are still dragging their feet in, some can just speculate why. But if you are a member country of this organization, there should be no discussion whatsoever when we have a clear-cut court case like Kavala. And therefore, we call upon the authorities in Turkey to release Kavala immediately. But that is not the only worrying development in Turkey. We're also seeing their crackdown on the opposition, especially in light of the steps right now taking regarding banning a completely democratic party like HDP. And if that is going to take place, that is not only a worrying, but extremely worrying situation that we have a member country banning democratic opposition just because they are opposition. Because that's the only reason why the Turkey authorities would do something like that. We're also seeing worrying developments in a country like Azerbaijan, where we actually call upon the authorities to do more. We all know the developments that are taking place between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but that does not excuse the shortcomings that Azerbaijan still have, and therefore it is important that the Monitoring Committee and the whole Assembly actually still put pressure on a country like, for example, Azerbaijan, to be more in line with the democratic values. And then there are a country like Russia. We all discuss Russia a lot, both in the Assembly, but also in the committee. And you know what? That's actually a shame, because we should not be discussing our biggest member country that much, because there shouldn't be so much to discuss, but there is. And there are so many issues to raise regarding Russia, so I'm not even able to raise them all in my somewhat short speaking time. But Navalny case, which our Assembly has written a very good report regarding, and also have very good resolutions regarding, is of course a clear-cut violation of all the fundamental values we have, that you're first trying to kill him, and if that's not possible, then you just jail him. That should not take place in 2022 in a European country. But we're also seeing the crackdown on completely legal NGOs. We see crackdown on whatever seems like opposition. And we see, sorry for being frank, but we see more and more steps in a more authoritarian direction. And actually, you should actually now in Russia discuss in the Duma, but also, of course, in the government, do we really want to be a European country? Do we really want to be a member of the Council of Europe? Because if you want, and I hope you want, then there are, of course, also some minimum standards that you, of course, should uphold. Because if you do not, then you are not a European democratic country anymore. I also raised some discussions regarding our inner work in our committee, and that is, of course, how we elect our rapporteurs and also the duration of the mandate. We all have a day job, so to speak, of being a member of our home country's parliament. And we all, especially in smaller countries like, for example, the country I represent, Denmark, but in countries like in that size, we have a lot of work to do because we have smaller parliaments than the bigger countries, and we also have a lot of work being perhaps spokesperson on different issues back home. And that is actually also the thing that I raised, that in light of that it is becoming more and more difficult to get rapporteurs, to get the necessary candidates, but also to have the rapporteurs have sufficient time to do that job. Because of their commitments back home, I actually put forward a proposal that instead of a 5-year term, we should put perhaps a 2-year term. So it will be more coherent with their job back home. It will be more able to have a more balance, and also should be able to, for us in the Monitoring Committee, to be able to produce more reports and to produce more visits that has been increasingly difficult because of the somewhat unbalanced approach a lot of our members have. So that was just a somewhat short overview, Chair, about my progress report, and I'm looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Mr. Rapporteur, Michael. And may I thank with you all those many co-rapporteurs who are behind you, because you are now summarizing the results of their work. And indeed, as you said, under very dire conditions, the Monitoring Committee managed to continue its work. And if I thank the co-rapporteurs, of course, I also thank the brains behind the co-rapporteurs, and that are the members of our staff. And may I thank you particularly, Michael, for the fact that under these dire conditions, you were able to preside your committee in an excellent way. And when I thank you, as an outgoing president of a committee, I do thank all the other outgoing chairs of committees, because I'm really proud of you, and I think the whole Assembly is proud on your work. But now, get back to the substance, and we will start the debate. You have at the end of the debate 3 minutes to reply. Also, that is not much, but you know our rules. Now we first go to the 5 speakers of the political groups. Erster Sprecher ist Herrn André Hunko, Deutschland, und spricht im Namen der UEL-Gruppe. André, du hast das Wort.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I would like to congratulate you as well and underline what you said. The thanks to all the rapporteurs and the chairs of the political the committees, and especially the brains behind them in the secretariat. I think this progress report shows that our Assembly is willing to do its task under really difficult political and pandemic circumstances. I want to underline the common understanding of the committee that in-person contacts are a necessary condition for a meaningful political dialogue, and that fact-finding missions were possible despite travel restrictions to Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, Malta, and Moldova. To the different countries, I really want to underline what Michael, and I would like to thank him for the report, said about Turkey. I think this is really a decisive moment, as we have now in the Committee of Ministers this procedure. Next week there is a new decision, and I think it's very, very important that Turkey is letting Kavala out following the court decision, and that we can go on, and that as well Mr. Demirtas, the head of HDP, will be released as well. So I think this is a very, very central and decisive situation, and our assembly should really support the Committee of Ministers who so far in two-thirds majority decided in that direction. We have as well the crisis in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I think we should do more about it. We have the problems in Hungary and Poland, but I want as well say some words about the crisis in Ukraine and Russia, by simply stating that both states face massive political challenges to overcome, influence as well, besides the geopolitical issues, to overcome the influence of oligarchs, and to develop the requirements for a stable, democratic and social political system. I think both states should strive to find ways out to follow the line of the Minsk process and fulfill their responsibilities with regard to Eastern Ukraine. We should all welcome the new ongoing talks in the D format, and we should not try to use the report of the progress of the monitoring procedure to play political games and hurt on the two parties. Ukraine, Russia, and the whole of Europe have more to win when we achieve a successful peace process, which could be a starting point to the development of long-lasting security system in Europe. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Danke sehr, Herr Hugo. Nächster Sprecher in unserem Debatte ist Herr Stefan Schenach, Österreich, im Namen der Gruppe der Sozialisten, Demokraten und Grünen. Stefan, du hast das Wort. Stefan, du hast das Wort.
Danke sehr, Herr Präsident. Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, namens meiner Fraktion, Sozialdemokraten und Grünen und Demokraten, möchte ich mich auch beim bisherigen Vorsitzenden Jensen herzlich bedanken. Ich kenne die Arbeit, ich war selbst Vorsitzender des Monitoring-Ausschusses. Es war nicht leicht die letzten 2 Jahre in Zeiten der Krise. Ich möchte mich aber auch namens meiner Fraktion bei allen Berichterstattern bedanken. Das war eine Arbeit unter schwierigen Bedingungen und nicht alle Besuche konnten stattfinden. Im Augenblick das Monitoringverfahren der Parlamentarischen Versammlung ist ein Herzstück der Versammlung. Und wir haben derzeit 11 Länder unter dem strengen und vollen Monitoringverfahren. Wir haben 3 im Postmonitoringverfahren. Wir haben viele Länder im periodischen und es gibt auch das thematische. Persönlich bin ich vielleicht anderer Meinung als der scheidende Vorsitzende, bin ich nicht dafür, dass man einen Berichterstatter auf 2 Jahre verkürzt. Ich kann das nur selber sagen als langjähriger Berichterstatter für Aserbaidschan. Man braucht seine Zeit, um das Land und die Situation zu verstehen. Dafür braucht es auch viele Besuche, um auch Dinge weiter zu bewegen und Entwicklungen hineinzubekommen. Es ist gut, dass wir Polen neu im Monitoringverfahren haben. Da konnten wir letztes Jahr bereits die Wahlen beobachten zur Präsidentschaftswahl. Und wir sehen, dass ja in Armenien, in Malta, in Georgien, in Moldawien, in Russland und der Ukraine Besuche möglich waren. Und vieles ist auch online passiert. Hoffen wir, dass das Jahr 2022 nun die Möglichkeit für alle besteht, wiederum die Länder zu besuchen, sich mit der Opposition, mit der Zivilgesellschaft, mit den Medien und so weiter auszutauschen in der bisherigen Version. Ich teile die kritische Beurteilung des Vorsitzenden bezüglich der Türkei. Das ist sicherlich eine Situation, gerade wenn die Urteile des Menschenrechtsgerichtshofs nicht umgesetzt werden. Das geht nicht, das können wir nicht akzeptieren. Das kann die Versammlung nicht akzeptieren, das kann auch der Ministerrat so nicht akzeptieren, denn das ist eine Verpflichtung, die einfach zu erfüllen sind. In diesem Sinne wird meine Fraktion diesem jährlichen Bericht, dem jährlichen Fortschrittsbericht des Monitoring-Ausschusses hier gerne unsere Zustimmung geben. Und noch einmal herzlichen Dank an den scheidenden Vorsitzenden, herzlichen Dank an alle Berichterstatter und Berichterstatterinnen. Danke.
Danke sehr, Stefan. Now I call in the debate Mr. Vladimir Vardanyan from Armenia, and he speaks on behalf of the EPP group. Vladimir, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, on behalf of my political group, I would like also to congratulate Mr. Jensen for his excellent work and for his excellent report, as well as to welcome all the members of the Monetary Committee and to appreciate their work. Democracy is not a static substance. It's a dynamic phenomenon which has no state of rest, which is either developing or backsliding. The Council of Europe and our Assembly are the watchdogs of democracy, monitoring it in motion by supporting positive trends and expressing concerns at setbacks. No state, ladies and gentlemen, is perfect, and there are always room for improvement. Therefore, our recommendations shouldn't be considered as instructions or pressure towards the countries concerned, but rather should be deemed as guidance, as advices intended to support democratic developments within the member states. Ladies and gentlemen, our Assembly continues to work in unprecedented sanitary conditions. The COVID-19 is still affecting our lives. Nevertheless, it is worth noting that due to the adapted working methods, the activities of monitoring rapporteurs remained uninterrupted throughout the whole reporting period, as illustrated by numerous statements, a number of reports, and information notes. It is quite important that despite the continuing travel restrictions, as it was mentioned by my colleagues, several fact-finding visits have taken place. I strongly believe that no hybrid or remote format is able to replace live communication, and sanitary regulations shouldn't be used as justification for postponing, suspending, or canceling democratic dialogue within our members on the ground. It was mentioned many times during this session that we are not a security organization. Nevertheless, the ongoing or frozen conflicts always have human rights impact, and we can be reluctant to them. From this perspective, Monitoring Committee's continuous attention to the developments concerning the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and its readiness to actively contribute to the establishment of political dialogue between the parties concerned at the parliamentary level should be welcomed. Dear colleagues, during the last decades, we have elaborated a sustainable legal basis for parliamentary monitoring procedures and relevant internal working methods for the activities of co-rapporteurs. Nevertheless, the practice shows that several amendments need to be done, and the monitoring procedures, in particular the time limit, should be updated to meet our current demands. Once again, let me express the words of gratitude to the rapporteur for his excellent work. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Vladimir. And next in the debate, I call Mr. Samad Saidov from Azerbaijan, and he speaks on behalf of the ECDA group. Samad, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the European Conservative groups, I also want to express my gratitude to the rapporteur for his work, for his very important job. And I think from this point of view, we should take into account that the monitoring committee is an essential one within the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I want to remind to my honorable friends and colleagues in the Parliamentary Assembly that in one of his speeches, Mr. Rick Dimes said that we should not only speak about the countries, we should speak with the countries. And from this point of view, I think this is very essential for the monitoring committee. Sometimes we can see that in our language, we can use two words: speak with the countries and push to the countries, especially those who are under the monitoring. For example, Russia. We just recently discussed very many times Russia. We speak with Russians and push to the Russians. But in the case sometimes of Turkey, Azerbaijan, Ukraine, and other states, we only push to the countries without speaking with countries. And that's why, from this point of view, I think, especially taking into account that we have new president of the monitoring committee, I hope that we will be able not only to push to the countries, but to speak to the country. This is the first. The second, I think very important, and I am fully in favor, to think about changing the term of the rapporteurship within the monitoring committee. 5 years is really too long. President of the Assembly for 2 years. Committee chairs, all other responsible positions, but only rapporteurs for 5 years. And that's why, in order to change, in order to bring fresh opinion, vision to the country, in order to understand that not only one person can be or could be responsible for the country, we should think about 2 years term for rapporteurship within the monitoring committee. Generally, on behalf of my group, I said that we have to, as I very many times mentioned, and my group supported this position, that we have to be very objective in our approach to the countries. We should reflect the realities. Yesterday we have talked about that. Now we're talking about that. And after this question, we also will be talking about that the realities is the key issues for this organization. We should do our best not to just, as I said at the very beginning, to speak, but to help countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Samad. Now I call in the debate Mr. Julian Bulai from Romania, and he speaks on behalf of the ALDE group. Julian, you have the floor. Julian, you are muted, I think. Try again. We cannot hear you. Is the problem on your side? Are you muted? Please try. We cannot hear you. Try again, say something. This does not go from your speaking time. Could you have to allow, Julian, you have to allow your microphone in your browser. You did that. Could we then move to the next speaker and come back as soon as we have fixed this to you? Because you look great, but without tone, Julian, we have a problem. Okay, we come back to you as soon as possible.
The next speaker.
Then the next speaker in the debate, I would like to call Madame Bouchka, but she's not there. Alors, le prochain orateur est Monsieur Alain Milon de la France. Vous avez la parole, Alain.
Je salue le rapport de notre collègue sur l'évolution de la procédure de suivi qui souligne certains progrès, mais relève aussi trop souvent la persistance de carences parfois graves. En lisant ce rapport, indépendamment des circonstances nationales, des caractéristiques communes apparaissent, traitées par ailleurs de manière transversale par notre Assemblée. Je pense ainsi à l'absence d'indépendance du système judiciaire, à l'absence d'indépendance ou de sécurité des médias, à la stigmatisation des minorités. Je pense également à la polarisation des enjeux politiques autour du thème de l'identité ou encore au verrouillage du paysage politique, voire à la mise au pas de la société civile. Trop souvent aussi, on relève la difficulté de faire appliquer les arrêts de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme dans tous les États membres du Conseil de l'Europe ont accepté l'autorité au moment de leur adhésion. Je veux à cet instant évoquer deux affaires particulièrement emblématiques, l'affaire du Kavala en Turquie et l'affaire de l'ONG Mémorial en Fédération de Russie. Les progrès constatés dans tel ou tel pays n'effacent pas une impression générale de menace pesant sur la marche démocratique de l'Europe. Et corrélativement, le besoin accru de cette Assemblée pour réaffirmer nos valeurs communes. Le rôle de la commission de suivi à cet égard essentiel. Pour être crédible dans cette démarche, il m'apparaît très important que deux rapporteurs de deux groupes politiques différents soient en charge du suivi d'un pays afin d'assurer l'impartialité et l'objectivité des rapports de la commission, condition sine qua non de leur acceptation par les pays concernés. Je souscris donc pleinement au refus opposé à la demande de réduction du nombre global de postes de rapporteurs en ne nommant qu'un seul rapporteur pour les rapports d'examen périodiques. Cela aurait été, me semble-t-il, tout à fait contre-productif. Enfin, je voudrais terminer mon intervention en évoquant le conflit entre l'Azerbaïdjan et l'Arménie au Haut-Karabakh et ses suites. Ce conflit a assurément profondément déstabilisé le système politique arménien, comme toute guerre perdue. Les élections de juin 2021 ont toutefois permis de surmonter la crise politique, comme l'a souligné le rapport sur le fonctionnement des institutions démocratiques en Arménie, débattu hier. Je forme le vœu que les gouvernements azéris et arméniens s'engagent dans la voie d'une normalisation des relations, ce qui suppose le retour des prisonniers de guerre ou des captifs et impliquera aussi nécessairement des opérations vérité de part et d'autre. Sans vérité partagée, la réconciliation sera au mieux précaire, voire probablement impossible. Merci pour votre écoute, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. And now we give the floor again. We try again with Mr. Boulay. Mr. Boulay, you have the floor.
C'est terminé.
Hello, do you hear me now? Good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of ALDE, I thank Mr. Jensen for authoring this report. I also want to thank the Secretariat for its work during this period. And I think the report gives us a very good overall picture on the most serious issues concerning the monitored countries, and I would like to focus on two of them, the hottest topics of the moment, Turkey and the Russian Federation. I fully noticed observations on the need for Turkey to ensure functioning of democratic institutions and stop the judicial harassment of opposition and dissenting voices, and restore the rule of law in the area of elections and political parties ahead of the next elections. As members of our parliaments enjoying full rights and protection, we should all protest against procedures seeking to lift immunity to parliamentarians belonging to opposition. It is obvious, based on this report, that the rule of law is in dire condition in Russia. It is important for our Assembly to strongly ask and make use of all the mechanisms at our disposal, the lifting of restrictions imposed by the Russian authorities on freedom of assembly, freedom of expression, and freedom of association, and of course, for the immediate release of Mr. Navalny. We are here as representatives of our countries in pace, so the designation by the Russian authorities of the Council of Europe's Schools of Political Studies Association is an undesirable organization is not something we could accept. Both Turkey and the Russian Federation seem to be willing to go as far as it takes for the crackdown of any opposition. And this includes extra-parliamentary opposition, activists for women's rights. We know and we deplore the Turkish decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, philanthropists or human rights organizations such as Memorial in Russia. Furthermore, the more recent Russian elections kept including in territories which do not belong to Russia, emphasized again that the Federation is not willing to implement the requests of the international community with regard to Eastern Ukraine, Crimea, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, or the presence of Russian troops in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova. It is not enough to notice our concern, since both Turkey and the Russian Federation are represented within our body, and yet we are having our reunion right now while Russia is concentrating large numbers of military troops along to the border with Ukraine. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Jens, Michael Jens, for your work on this.
Thank you, Mr. Blight. And in the debate, I call next Mr. Aydin from Turkey. You have the floor. Howard.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is nice to be called eventually. I would like to start also by thanking Mr. Jensen. I had the privilege of serving on the monitoring committee under his chairmanship, and I'd like to pay tribute to the way in which he undertook the work that was there and that we had to do. I think that we need to look at the question of monitoring again as a whole. And I know that there are discussions that are taking place with other organizations about how we change our monitoring procedure. But I think it is absolutely essential that we make the point that monitoring is a fundamental part of this assembly. It is what we do, and actually what we do very well. And I wouldn't like to see us lose that at all. Now, I understand that the Committee of Ministers also undertake monitoring procedures, and there is some opportunity for bringing the monitoring that we do into line with what the Committee of Ministers is doing, so that we present a unified face in the monitoring that we do there. But I would point out very strongly that we should not lose sight that monitoring is important to us. I have been the co-rapporteur for Turkey for the monitoring committee, and picking up Mr. Sadov's point earlier, we have tried very hard to speak with the country, and I'd like to pay tribute to Ahmet Yildiz and to give him the thanks that are due for the work that he has done to be able to get us to do that. Now, I'd also like to thank Thomas Hammerberg, who is my co-rapporteur for Turkey, but has not been able to be with us this time. The problems with Turkey are significant. We've already heard that there are the problems of Kavala and Demirtas. We know that there are problems with the appointment of rectors of universities with the opposition, and also with the Istanbul Convention. But we have tried, with the difficulties that have been imposed on us because of COVID, We have tried to speak with the country. We have tried to have online roundtables with individuals across the country that represent as wide a view as possible so that we can get a good opinion. We are, of course, now trying to make a visit to Turkey in order to draw all this together. But I go back to what I said at the beginning. It's important that we do it, and it's important that we do it well.
Thank you, Mr. Howell. And in the debate, I call next now Mr. Aydin from Turkey.
He has to request the floor, please.
Mr. Aydin, can you request the floor?
Let's give the floor to Ms. Ah, it's okay.
It's okay.
Thank you, President. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Dear President and dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the Rapporteur for this report and the whole committee for their diligent work over the past year. I believe that bringing about the changes mentioned in the report regarding the reference period of periodic monitoring reports, committee membership and Rapporteur positions will contribute to both the functioning of the committee and the monitoring process. Thus, the reports prepared in this context can be more comprehensive, reliable, and efficient. Regarding the draft resolution of the report, I wish to state that I would have appreciated more if some developments and issues about Turkey had been considered. Considering the shortage of time, I would like to touch on some of them. And I first of all want to remind you that the Turkish Constitutional Court's decisions on Mr. Gergerlioğlu and Mr. Berberoğlu's cases are welcomed in the report. These are demonstrations of the independence of the judicial system in Turkey, contrary to the accusations, of course. Furthermore, the judicial reform process still continues with the aim to make the judiciary more trustworthy and accessible and to increase the standards regarding individual rights, freedoms, and democracy. In the light of these, as the legal proceedings continue, I would like to ask you all to respect and trust in this process on cases mentioned in the report, such as the one against HDP. We should also keep in mind that my country is actually fighting against multiple terrorist organizations. For instance, many of you would probably remember the failed coup attempt of FETÖ, which left 251 Turkish citizens dead and more than 2,000 wounded. Also, you surely must have heard of PKK, a terrorist organization responsible for the deaths of more than 40,000 people, including civilians, of course. Additionally, Turkey, as a founding member of the Council of Europe, is certainly aware of its responsibilities stemming from the European Convention on Human Rights and has demonstrated its commitment by being the country that closed the highest number of cases in the last 3 years and also has been punctual in paying compensation. Finally, regarding the call for the revision of the legislation on elections, I am glad to share with you that the government has decided to lower the current electoral threshold of 10% to 7%. I hope the Turkish parliament will adopt soon the necessary law on these issues. And finally, I would like to add very little tiny notice that, Kavala case is ongoing case and it is still, on the judiciary. On the other hand, I would like to see that the committee should have heard the voice and cries of those mothers who lost their children, whose children were abducted, from their home and taken to the terrorist organizations through HDP headquarters. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aydin. And in the debate, I call next Ms. Honak from Albania.
Esteemed chair of the session, esteemed colleagues, first of all, I want to give congratulations to esteemed President of PACE, Mr. Cox, and a lot of success in this mandate, even to the heads of the committees. For me, it's the first time as an Albanian MP of Socialist Party being member of the Assembly of the Parliament of Council of Europe. And I want to congratulate the Monitoring Committee and all members that have been involved for their professional work and contribution. Albania has shown commitment working and guaranteeing the principles for stronger rule of law and consolidating democracy, and respecting human rights in the lines and principles advocated by Council of Europe and European Union. Based even on the recent reports, Albania has made significant steps forward on the main reforms, results that are acknowledged even by international community. We have successfully advanced our agendas of establishing the rule of law through the justice reform and fight against corruption. And the justice reform, I want to emphasize, that has been the main reform undertaken in the last 30 years of the democracy for Albania, which will give concrete results even on the fighting impunity and corruption of high-level officials. As a regard of the elections, the general elections were held on 25 April of last year, following the cross-party agreement on 5 June of 2021 that led to a wide-ranging electoral reform in line of OSCE ODIHR recommendation. Electronic identification of voters was implemented in the polling station, while e-voting and e-counting was piloted successfully in 32 polling stations in Tirana. The OSCE ODIHR final assessment found that elections were generally well organized, and the new electoral administration gained the trust of most stakeholders. And meantime, the Parliament is, in this moment, is preparing a new electoral commission in order to discuss all the recommendations of the Monitoring Committee, of the OSCE recommendations, and all the concerns and recommendations of international partners. I can say that we are committed on trying to be oriented in all the lines of the recommendations of our partners, not just only for the electoral.
Thank you, Ms. Honak. And now I ask Mr. Janian and Mr. Attar to request the floor, and while I'm going to give the floor to Madame Kern from French. Mr. Kern from French.
Oui, bonjour Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues. Je veux saluer le rapport très complet de notre collègue Michael Astrup-Jensen et je l'en félicite. Pour ma part, je voudrais évoquer plus particulièrement 2 points de ce rapport. La Géorgie et les travaux à venir de la sous-commission sur les conflits entre États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, à la présidence de laquelle vous avez eu l'honneur de m'élire. Concernant la Géorgie, où je me suis rendu encore dernièrement avec mon collègue Titus Correttian, nous sommes particulièrement préoccupés par le climat politique profondément polarisé qui règne dans le pays. Cette tension a contribué à la rupture de l'accord politique négocié par l'Union européenne. Je veux réitérer ici avec force l'appel que nous avons lancé en décembre aux 2 plus grands partis, le Rêve géorgien et le Mouvement national uni, de placer le bien commun de la nation au-dessus de toute stratégie politique partisane. C'est fondamental. Au cours des dernières années, la Géorgie s'est engagée sur la voie de la consolidation démocratique. Des progrès considérables ont été accomplis. Cette voie, qui est la responsabilité partagée de toutes les forces politiques du pays, apparaît aujourd'hui en péril. Il est encore temps de redresser la barre. Pour cela, la mise en place d'un système judiciaire véritablement indépendant et impartial s'impose, ce qui implique en particulier une réforme du Conseil supérieur de la justice. C'est à mes yeux, à nos yeux, une condition essentielle. Puissent nos débats de ce jour et la perspective de la partie de session d'avril contribuer à débloquer cette situation. Concernant la sous-commission sur les conflits entre États membres du Conseil de l'Europe, nos travaux devraient se concentrer sur le processus de règlement transnistrien, le processus de règlement chypriote et le conflit entre Azerbaïdjan et Arménie à propos du Haut-Karabakh, qui a hélas beaucoup occupé notre Assemblée au cours des derniers mois. Cet agenda est dense et je forme ici le vœu qu'il ne soit pas alourdi par d'autres conflits. Vous savez à quoi je pense, notamment aux menaces liées à la concentration de troupes russes à la frontière ukrainienne, ce qui m'inquiète à cet égard tout particulièrement. Je ne peux que souscrire au rapport qui nous est soumis. Il témoigne malheureusement des tensions qui fracturent cette Europe à laquelle nous sommes si attachés. Je vous rassure, ma voix n'est pas due au Covid, mais à un refroidissement que j'ai attrapé hier. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. And in the debate, I call next Mr. Attar. You are the floor. I'm sorry, I think we are having some problem with the connection. Okay, I'm going to give the floor to Ms. Busquets in the meantime. Ms. Busquets, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, I'd like to thank all our colleagues who continued the monitoring activity despite all the challenges on the pandemic. And this is something that has to be written as a good note. It seems from the report text that the lack of country visit due to COVID has impeded rapporteurs to access country situation in reliable and all-inclusive information. And sometimes fluctuations in the appointment of the rapporteurs has had an impact in this too. Therefore, I wish that pandemic ends soon and we get back to the normal activity here in peace and in our parliaments. I have this opinion because in case of Albania, for example, the monitoring reports talk about election of April 2001, but there is another PACE report on the monitoring of the election that has to be taken into account. This provides information for the electoral activity of the Albanian president for his neutral constitutional role that has not been respected. Meanwhile, the monitoring report refers only to an impeachment procedure that is happening in Albania. One more thing that I noticed in the monitoring report is that there is lack of updated information with regard to the media law. However, the COVID has had these problems for all of us to have full access into information. But we need to know and we need to work together, as I have stated before, and I want to reinstate even today, that monitoring of PACE should be as a mechanism to improve countries, to have better standards in democracy, protection of human rights, and in the strengthening of the rule of law. And keeping this in mind, we need to be careful when we formulate recommendations for specific countries. In case that our recommendation should serve to help these countries, we need to be based on reliable information. We need to be compatible with all the reports of PACE during the monitoring activity. And at the other hand, see what the impact of the recommendations of the monitoring activity gives for the countries locally. To this end, I want to ask my colleagues that we need to discuss even the mechanism of monitoring, the prolongation, the going on with this mechanism. And in the case of Albania, for example, we are 26 years in monitoring. We need to reorganize standards and discussions on how monitoring could be effective to help countries. And in the conclusion, let me thank all our colleagues that have been involved in the monitoring activity and use this occasion to ask all of my colleagues, members in the European countries, to help Albania and the region in the process of the integration with European Union, and as well the advancement of Kosovo adherence in the Council of Europe. Thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Mr. Buscat. And now in the debate, I call Mr. Attar from Malta. You have the floor. Okay, we have some trouble with the connection, so I call on the debate next Mr. Slutsky from the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Здравствуйте, дорогие коллеги. Надеюсь, что меня хорошо видно и слышно. К сожалению, доклад, который мы обсуждаем, доклад господина Йенсена, вызывает достаточно много вопросов. В принципе, российская делегация полагает, что нам давно пора от мониторинга странового перейти к мониторингу ситуационному, когда под процедуру мониторинга будут подпадать любые ситуации, не соответствующие высоким стандартам Совета Европы, в том числе и в так называемых старых демократиях. Это позволит стереть искусственные разделительные линии на пространстве Совета Европы и позволит нашей организации занять достойное место в формируемой именно сейчас, в эти годы, новой европейской архитектуре 21-го столетия. Кроме того, если говорить конкретно о докладе Майкла Йенсена, с которым мы прекрасно друг друга знаем, я держу в руках этот доклад. Если мы возьмем пункт 2.6 пояснительного меморандума с заголовком «Нагорно-Карабахский конфликт», здесь содержится крайне противоречивая и не отражающая сегодняшнюю действительность информация, что свидетельствует о явно одностороннем подходе автора документа к столь важному для Совета Европы вопросу. Вместе с тем и в резолюции содержится параграф номер 3 со ссылкой на урегулированный Нагорно-Карабахский конфликт, что не отражает новых создавшихся в регионе реалий после подписания трехстороннего заявления от 10 ноября, который положил конец военным действиям. Должен сказать, дорогие коллеги, что горжусь тем, что президент России Владимир Владимирович Путин принял самое серьезное участие в разрешении Нагорно-Карабахского конфликта. Хочу еще раз поздравить нашего бывшего коллегу, бывшего главу азербайджанской делегации, а ныне главу государства, господина Ильхама Алиева, с недавним 60-летием. Он делает все для соответствия ситуации в стране высоким стандартам Совета Европы. И предлагаю, коллеги, присмотреться к данным неточностям в резолюции и принять соответствующее решение для их исправления. Уверен, что нам всем надо вместе активно работать в ходе процедуры мониторинга для того, чтобы информация, которая содержится в мониторинговых докладах, не была устаревшей, а процедура мониторинга не разъединяла страны-члены Совета Европы, а наоборот способствовала движению к высоким стандартам нашей организации. Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. Slutsky. And now I call next in the debate to Ms. Gilametti from Albania. She is not connected. Then we go again. We try with Mr. Attar.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. And first of all, I would like to thank the co-reporters for their work and their cordiality with which they have conducted the discussions in Malta. I am pleased to know that the fact-finding mission is recognizing the bold historical reforms that were implemented in my country, Malta, particularly those that have been made substantial changes and improved procedures that have been with us for decades. These include procedures for the appointment of the Chief Justice, the President of the Republic, the appointment of the Commissioner of Police, the appointment of the members of the Judiciary, the Office of the Attorney General, and the newly created constitutional role of the State Advocate. Parliament approved as well legislation to enhance the Permanent Commission Against Corruption, the Office of the Commissioner for Standards in Public Life, the Office of the Auditor General, and as well the Office of the Ombudsman. I note as well the call by the co-rapporteurs for a profound reform of the Maltese Parliament, particularly in relation to the establishment of a full-time parliament. And I must say that the present government is all in favor of having a discussion on the possibility of giving elected members of parliament the option of serving parliament full-time. And in fact, there's as well an electoral pledge to this effect. In addition, the party in government has publicly made it clear that it is in favor of having a national discussion on the Maltese electoral system. In relation to the public inquiry into the assassination of journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, the Office of the Prime Minister has been holding consultations to ensure swift and timely implementation of the recommendations, and these meetings were constructive and comprehensive. There was a lot of common ground, especially on the aim and objective of safeguarding the protection of journalists and the media in Malta. And as recommended by the public inquiry, a committee has now been set up with the aim of analyzing the journalism and the media sector in Malta to underline areas which require development and make recommendations to the Prime Minister. The committee will also examine the draft legislation amendments prepared by the government following the consultation carried out with key stakeholders, and these include amendments on the protection of journalists against strategic lawsuits, against public participation, anti-SLAPP, as well as an amendment to the Constitution of Malta on the right to freedom of expression to ensure that freedom and pluralism of the media and the importance of the role of journalists are respected. Reforms and objections taken by the Maltese government are attesting to the fact that good governance and the rule of law are indeed on the Maltese government's top priority list. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Attard. That concludes the list of the speakers. And now I call Mr. Jensen, the reporter, to reply to the debate. You have 3 minutes. Yeah, points of order.
There is someone going out of the list that is not available at this very moment, and I suggest that you take another number of persons. It's only a short list, and I think they have important input. So, for example, my neighbor behind me. Probably is it possible, Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Yildiz, I'm very sorry for the delay that there has been over this, but you are very welcome to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since I got the position, I try my best to cooperate with both the committee and both the co-rapporteurs. With this understanding, I invited you and Mr. Hammerberg to Turkey. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it due to pandemic. Also, I invited the committee to meet in Turkey in March, but it couldn't happen due to also pandemic. Hopefully, we can get it if the conditions allow in May. The committee is welcome in Turkey. Hopefully, we can do it in a better way. Mr. Chairman, of course, Turkey is a deep-rooted state. We know our responsibilities. But I have one issue here, a kind warning that in the meetings in the reports. Yesterday, we dealt with the security in Europe. Although we talked a lot about the bilateral disputes, some of them escalated to the armed conflicts. Although terrorism is a big threat to the European security, it causes a lot of frictions among states, weakens states, also causes a lot of casualties among people, create hatreds among people. That's why in our dealing, we should be careful about terrorism. Combating terrorism is a very well established area of cooperation among states, especially in Europe. I urged in the committee to name PKK as a terrorist organization, as was recognized by the European courts, including European Court of Human Rights and many national courts. I hope in the future it will be accepted. Otherwise, it causes a lot of harm to the credibility of these reports in Turkey and in other countries' public opinion. Anyhow, that the committee is welcome in Turkey in May. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yildiz. I think the members of this assembly need an explanation of what just happened then. When the papers were produced for the chair up here, they forgot that there was a list on the other side and it wasn't duplicated. So I'm very sorry that has happened. I now have the full list, so we will continue with that and we will go back to Lutsim Basha, who I think is now online, to be able to make her presentation. Mojenit? Okay, Lutsim Basha is not with us, but Olyena Mojenit is.
Thank you very much. Monitoring committee for the recommendations for Ukraine. The main objective for 2022 from a new high qualifications and a transparent and competitive process. Our partners helped to establish the Public Council of International Experts, which assisted in selecting anti-corruption judges. Today, it is the most efficient court. Is it okay?
Yes.
Also, we adopt a law regulating the issue of the oligarchs' influence on our state policy, which will contribute to democratization. The Venice Commission is going to give an opinion on this law, and I do not doubt that Ukraine will take it into account. Concerning the closure of certain TV channels, unfortunately, the aggressor, Russia Federation, is using informational weapons to influence Ukraine. Some TV channels have carried out systematic activities aimed at the realization of beneficial for Russian narratives concerning the legalization of aggression in eastern Ukraine and the legitimization of occupation of Crimea. To fight in the informational war, we must reform the media market. Without real leverage, it is and will remain open for informational attacks. The security of journalists is also in priority. Ukraine Journalists Association continuing cooperation with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the National Police of Ukraine to strengthen guarantees for the protection. Moreover, Parliament adopted the law defining indigenous people as the ethnic community formed on the territory of Ukraine and which does not have its own state outside our country. This law is an important message. The occupying state pursues a policy of repression in Crimea, while Ukraine protects and provides development opportunities. Ukrainian legislation guarantees national minorities the rights to study in communal education establishment in their native language, additional to the state one. Thus, any fears about possible oppression of the rights of national minorities have no basis. On 33 August 2021, the Crimea platform was held. 46 countries and international organizations took part in it. We are grateful that our achievements in the development of international cooperations on the occupation and prevention of risks posed by the occupation of Crimea were mentioned. We would like the cooperation to continue to hear the position further action for the occupation of Crimea. All these changes threaten not only our country, but the security of whole of Europe. Only yesterday we talked about protection, about enforced disappearance, and yesterday the Ukrainian parliament introduced legislative changes for the social protection of missing person and their family. Our work here is about real change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alina, and thank you for your perseverance as well in keep on going for that presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now we have Mr. Hamid, who is online. Mr. Hamid, you will need to unmute. Can you hear us? No? Okay, well, let's come back to Mr. Hamid if we can get him again. Let's go to Madam Rukavishnikova. Is she online? Madam, you have the floor.
Уважаемые коллеги, слышно меня, надеюсь. Я рада, что к моей стране нет ни одной претензии по поводу выполнения тех обязательств, которые Российская Федерация добровольно приняла на себя на основании 193-й резолюции ПАСЕ и в отношении которых должны проводиться мониторинговые процедуры. Это означает, что де-факто Россия давно выполнила взятые на себя обязательства и де-юре должна перейти в режим постмониторингового диалога. Вызывает разочарование факт ежегодного неправомерного расширения перечня вступительных обязательств России за счет включения вопросов в сиюминутной повестки, непроверенной и не соответствующей действительности информации. Приведу только два примера. Очень показательно, что, используя недостоверную информацию, на которой базируются выводы, авторы доклада даже не пытаются придать ей вид легитимной. Так, в числе обвинений в адрес России звучат, цитирую, предположительное лишение около 9 миллионов российских граждан их пассивного избирательного права. Уважаемые коллеги, в соответствии с законодательством Российской Федерации, которое полностью соответствует требованиям международных правовых актов, граждане временно ограничиваются в праве быть избранными в связи с совершением уголовного преступления. Количество таких граждан составляет менее 1,5% от общего числа избирателей. Эта информация, конечно, неинтересна, потому что она не производит такого впечатляющего эффекта. Еще один пример фейковой информации о том, что часто упоминаемый на этой площадке закон об иноагентах создает неравные условия в проведении выборной кампании для различных кандидатов. Кстати, аналогичные законы действуют во многих странах устоявшейся демократии. Напомню, коллеги, что так называемый закон об иноагентах предусматривает раскрытие информации о факте получения кандидатами финансирования из зарубежных источников. То есть создает условия для прозрачности и доступности для избирателей этой информации. Избиратели заслуживают того, чтобы знать правду о деятельности кандидатов на выборах. Те, кто считает иначе, фактически утверждают, что правда оказывает давление на волеизъявление граждан. По-моему, это звучит абсурдно. Получается, что достоверная информация вредна для избирательных процедур. И в заключение. К сожалению, абсолютно непонятно, почему на протяжении 2 десятков лет блокируется предложение России о необходимости пересмотра системы мониторинга, созданной в конце прошлого века. Мы давно и последовательно предлагаем перейти от странового мониторинга к тематическому, который успешно используется Комитетом министров Совета Европы. Если будет введен тематический мониторинг, тогда начнет преобладать подлинный принцип равенства для всех 47 государств Совета Европы. Исчезнут унизительные маркеры уровней демократии для государств внутри нашей организации. Тогда у всех стран на территории европейского пространства появится больше поводов уделить пристальное внимание внутригосударственным вопросам защиты интересов граждан и общечеловеческих ценностей, не замалчивая проблемы и не оставаясь в стороне от этого процесса. Спасибо.
Thank you very much. Now we will go back to Mr. Hamid to see whether he can join us.
Can you, President?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, President and dear colleagues. I will speak about point 106 from the report of the recent elections in Bulgaria only. I would like to thank you for the election of the mission to Bulgaria.
Mr. Hamid, I'm afraid we must interrupt you. You are breaking up in your speech. Have you selected floor?
Yes.
Could you try once more?
Okay. What about now?
Yep, try again.
Thank you, President and dear colleagues. I will speak about points 102 to 106 from the report regarding the recent elections in Bulgaria only. I would like to thank once again PACE for the election observation mission to Bulgaria. The ALDE party has also conducted an election observation mission and have several findings, which are mentioned in the PACE EON report and the progress of the assembly monitoring procedure, but I would like to add some more details. The vote buying is a long-standing problem that we have identified more than 12 years ago and have appealing ever since publicly for legal actions against it. But in these past elections and the elections in July, the Minister of Interior, Boyko Rashkov, who was responsible for the organization of the election as well, abused the fight with this ugly phenomena as an excuse for illegal and unlawful actions against political opponents. I will give you just a few examples. First, the police authorities have entered into several polling sections in the district of Haskovo and interfered in the voting process of the election day. Second, people officially recognized as such with disabilities were interrogated in their homes by police authorities and were forced to do physical exercise to prove their status of disability, which only a designated medical committee can do. Candidates for parliament were forced by the police to sign protocols that they will not campaign for their respective political party and will not educate voters how to handle the electronic machine voting in general. Candidates were subject of demonstrative police searches in many regions, as in the cases of Burgas and Vidin. The candidates were stripped down naked and humiliated in front of their families and neighbors without having their immunity removed from the Central Election Committee and without the required by law approval of the prosecutor on duty. And the last one, the local authorities, based on their political affiliations, were a target of random police actions which hindered them from fulfilling their duties by law in organizing the elections. As a conclusion from our side, I will give you just one figure from the official statistics from the past two elections, which speaks for itself. From 20,000 election-related police actions, there are only 250 forwarded to the prosecution. This means that there are more than 19,750 cases of police brutality and breach of human, civic, and political rights of political opponents. Thank you, dear colleagues, and also I would like to thank PACE once again for the long-standing commitment. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Mr. Hamid. We now go to Mr. Bashkin from the Russian Federation, who is also online.
Бесспорно, процедура мониторинга необходима, и она позволяет не только контролировать исполнение обязательств странами, но она и помогает им улучшать свое законодательство. Но здесь есть два важных обстоятельства. Наше государство, я повторю, выступает за тематический, а не за страновой мониторинг. Иначе одни страны будут в процедуре находиться вечно, а другие в нее не попадут никогда. Второе. Выводы мониторинга должны стремиться не просто к перечислению проблем, но и к подаче информации с учетом реального положения вещей и здравого смысла. А в этом смысле часть текста мониторинга по меньшей мере вызывает недоумение. Я повторю то, что сказала моя коллега, госпожа Рукавишникова. Это заявление о неких 9 миллионах человек в Российской Федерации, лишенных пассивного избирательного права. Возможно, стоит поинтересоваться, о ком идет речь. Кроме перечисленной категории, о которой сказала Ирина, кроме людей, осужденных за уголовные преступления, например, кражу или незаконный оборот наркотиков, что, кстати, является практикой и в других государствах, в число таких лиц вошли обладатели иностранного гражданства, которые по закону не вправе занимать государственную должность. Это также практика многих стран, и вы это знаете. Таких людей в России несколько миллионов, и их гражданство – это их право. Я вам скажу, сколько человек из этой категории реально получили отказ в регистрации. Всего 27 человек, менее 0,01% от всех зарегистрированных кандидатов во все уровни власти. Гора родила мышь. Правозащитный центр «Мемориал» был ликвидирован судом не за политическую деятельность, а за систематическое и преднамеренное нарушение законодательства. В Российской Федерации на сегодня действует 80 некоммерческих организаций. Я это уже говорил. Они выполняют функции иностранных агентов и добросовестно исполняют требования закона. Никто к ним не имеет претензий. Но «Мемориал» так не поступает. А разве закон не един для всех? Вызывает недоумение перечисления в докладе претензий к парламентским выборам в России. В реальности соответствие выборов российскому законодательству подтверждено признанием мирового сообщества и различными миссиями наблюдателей. Как-то неловко видеть в качестве претензий к российским выборам так называемое ответственное хранение бюллетеней в течение ночи. Абсурд. По пути от типографии к избирателям бюллетени во всех странах ответственно хранятся в сейфах и не одну ночь. В России их вообще охраняет полиция. Нельзя согласиться с замечаниями к России относительно территориальных конфликтов. В Приднестровье российские войска находятся в качестве миротворцев. На территории Южной Осетии, Абхазии и на Украине российских войск нет. А судьбу Крыма на референдуме решил народ Крыма. И всем это хорошо известно. Поэтому выражаем надежду на то, что мониторинговые доклады будут в дальнейшем формироваться с более высоким уровнем ситуационной и юридической точности. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you, Mr. Bashkin. And now we move to our last speaker, Mr. Ivanov from Bulgaria. Is he online? He is. Good. But you are not unmuted, Mr. Ivanov. Unmute.
Thank you. I hope now that you can hear me. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address this very important forum for all of Europe. And I would like to express my thanks to the rapporteur and his team, and as well as the secretariat for doing their excellent job. I would like to comment on, first of all, on the text on Bulgaria, and to express my happiness with the positive evaluation of the election process in Bulgaria. Whatever claims of irregularities there might be, Bulgarian courts are available to address them. We also would like to point out that in December, a new government was formed in Bulgaria, finally resolving the sharp political crisis in the country. And particularly that this new government has adopted a very ambitious agenda in the coalition agreements vis-à-vis the judicial reform. The commitments that the government has undertaken are going to address a number of long-standing recommendations by the Venice Commission and the European Court of Human Rights vis-à-vis the reform of the Bulgarian Supreme Judicial Council, to increase the impartiality and independence of the Bulgarian courts, and also to impose greater accountability on the prosecution office, and particularly the office of the Prosecutor General in the country. I would also like to comment on the text vis-à-vis the Republic of North Macedonia, which contains references to Bulgarian negotiation position in the context of the European Union. And we would like particularly to point out that the new government, both in Sofia and Skopje, have adopted a number of very positive steps. In the very short period in which the new governments have existed, there have been two top-level meetings. First, the Bulgarian Prime Minister, Mr. Petkov, visited Skopje, and then there was a cabinet-to-cabinet meeting in Sofia, which established a very positive dynamic, and we see a very positive change in the overall atmosphere, as well as some hopes that we will finally see particular specific results in the dialogue between the two countries. So it is against this background that we are raising the objection to this link that appears to be made by the final part of the text on North Macedonia between the Bulgarian position and the domestic political events in North Macedonia. We think that definitely this is at least very questionable, and also it can absolutely play no positive role going forward. So let's not engage in this type of commentary. Moreover, this is a matter for the European Union and not the Council of Union. And let's give chance of the positive new atmosphere to really produce some results. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ivanov. Well, that really does conclude the list of speakers. And I call Mr. Jensen, the rapporteur, to reply to the debate. You have 3 minutes. Is he online? Michael, we are waiting for you. Can you request the floor again, Michael? No? Mr. Jensen, can you refresh your browser? We're trying desperately here to get you online, Michael.
It worked. That was actually a good advice to refresh the browser.
Very good, Michael.
So thank you for that, Chair, and thank you so much for all the comments that has been raised by our colleagues. And let me just touch upon a few of them because of my speaking time. First of all, I would just touch upon what our Russian colleagues said. First of all, I don't see that the country monitoring should be removed and put in place by a so-called thematic review instead, because this is not to put a shameful eye on a member country or anything like that. It is just to push the attention to where the shortcomings are. And if there are no shortcomings, a country are not under monitoring anymore. This is very important to say. And therefore, because we raise a lot of attention on Russia and other countries, is because, unfortunately, there are shortcomings. For example, one of our colleagues from Russia said that the foreign agent law was in line with the Council of Europe standards. That is absolutely not true. The Venice Commission has stated repeatedly that the foreign agent law is not in line with the Council of Europe standards. And why I'm raising this is because we all need to be in line with the Council of Europe standards, because every country actually signed to uphold these standards when we became members. I would like to also, of course, say thank you so much for all the nice comments regarding our job. And actually, shamefully, I forgot to thank somebody in my opening speech, and that is, of course, the Secretariat. Because as Ola has mentioned, if without the Secretariat, we could not do our job. And they are really the brain and especially the muscles behind the committee's efforts to actually do our job, even though there was a pandemic. And just a short comment to Mr. Shenak, my very dear colleague. I fully understand your comment regarding the discussion on terms for rapporteurs. I myself have been a co-rapporteur for Georgia for 5 years, so I fully understand the idea. But the reality is that it is becoming more and more difficult to get candidates for rapporteurship, and also to get the rapporteurs to allocate enough time to be rapporteurs in practice. So that's why I'm raising the debate, and I think it's important that we actually touch upon it. So all in all, thank you so much for all the comments, and I'm looking forward to, not in the chairman position of the Monitoring Committee, but so to speak, on the normal seats to follow the work and be involved in the work, because there's a lot to do still. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Does the chairperson of the committee wish to speak? Do we have him? You have 3 minutes, Mr. Fassino. Mr. Fassino needs to request the floor. Well, now we...
Voilà, monsieur.
Very good, very good.
J'avais un problème de connexion. Alors, avant tout, je veux remercier le rapporteur parce qu'il a fait un grand travail, mais surtout parce qu'il a été le président de la commission monitoring pour ces dernières années et il a dirigé la commission d'une façon très efficace. Donc, je suis le nouveau président et comme nouveau président, je suis vraiment heureux de succéder à mon collègue et de féliciter pour le travail qu'il a fait. Le rapport, c'est un rapport très précis qui examine, qui résume le travail qu'on a fait avec le monitorage sur les 11 pays qui ont été examinés, les 3 pays qui ont été examinés par une activité de post-monitorage et les autres pays sur lesquels on a fait l'examen pour vérifier l'observance des droits et des standards démocratiques. Même s'il y avait Covid-19, qui l'a rendu évidemment le travail bien plus compliqué, la Commission il a bien travaillé et le rapport le démontre. Et je pense qu'une chose il faut souligner. M. Seydov, dans son intervention, il a dit une chose que je partage, c'est-à-dire la commission de monitorage, il ne doit pas parler d'un pays, mais il doit parler avec un pays. C'est vraiment, et c'est exactement ce que notre commission il fait toujours. Nos rapporteurs, ils travaillent avec une interlocution continue avec les autorités, soit l'autorité du gouvernement, soit l'autorité d'opposition, soit les différents représentants du parlementaire, et on travaille avec une interlocution concrète et continue, parce que nous ne sommes pas un tribunal, nous ne sommes pas des juges, nous sommes une commission qui doit travailler pour favoriser que les valeurs et les droits qui sont à la base de notre Assemblée ils soient accomplis dans tous les pays, et chaque citoyen dans chaque pays il peut être sûr de ses droits et de ses accomplissements. Donc je pense que nos rapporteurs ont bien travaillé et toujours ils travaillent avec cette façon. Et je pense que donc qu'il faut continuer dans cette direction. Le rapport il contient pour chaque pays des indications sur lesquelles on continuera à travailler, et j'assure une continuité avec le travail qu'on a fait jusqu'à ce moment pour procéder et continuer dans notre travail avec tous les pays qui sont membres du Conseil de l'Europe dans un esprit de coopération et d'amitié. Merci.
Mr. Fassino, can we keep you online? Or has he gone? Mr. Fassino, can you ask for the floor again? It would be good to keep you online rather than you disappear and never be able to get you back. Ah, that's very good.
I am here.
Very good. Just stay online. I've got you, and I don't want to lose you. Okay. The Monitoring Committee has presented a draft resolution, which is document 15433, to which 11 amendments have been tabled. I understand that the chairperson of the Monitoring Committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 5 to the draft resolution, which was unanimously approved by the Committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Fassino?
Oui, parce qu'elle a été approuvée à l'unanimité.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody object? Mr. Bashkin, do you object? Yeah.
Коллеги. Уважаемые коллеги, Ассамблея не выражает озабоченности, например, по поводу перемещения частей Бундесвера по территории Германии или венгерских вооруженных сил по территории Венгрии. И абсолютно правильно, потому что расположение национальной армии в любой части национальной территории – это суверенное право любого государства, если это не ограничено конкретным договором. Кроме того, авторы
Mr. Bashkin, may I interrupt you, please? Are you objecting to Amendment 5?
Да, я возражаю против 5-й поправки и хочу сделать по этому поводу в течение минуты пояснения. Могу это сделать? Дайте, пожалуйста, слово.
No, I'm afraid you cannot be given the floor. The Amendment 5 will be taken individually. I understand that the chairperson of the Monitoring Committee wishes to propose to the Assembly
Хорошо, окей, я буду ждать.
That amendments 1, 2, 4, 6,
Но вы сами
8...
спросили про 5-ю поправку, поэтому
Mr.
спасибо, я
Bashkin,
понял.
we have moved on, I'm afraid. I understand that the chairperson of the monitoring committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 3 to the draft resolutions, which were rejected by the committee with a two-thirds majority, be declared as rejected. Is that so, Mr. Fassino? I think I saw you nodding.
Oui.
Good. Does anybody object? Mr. Sadov objects. Good. Does anybody else object? Then these amendments will be taken individually in the order in which they appear in the compendium.
We need to check if the objection has the support of 10 members.
Hang on. Please, could those who object to this raise their hand in the hemicycle or request to speak via the remote system? I remind the Assembly that the objection must be supported by at least 10 members.
Number 1.
Okay. We have 10. Okay. So all of the amendments will be taken individually. We've come to amendment number 1, which was one of those rejected by a two-thirds majority, and I call Mr. Sadov to support amendment 1. You have 1 minute.
First of all, Mr. President, thank you very much for understanding. And I know yesterday we already discussed this question. I don't want to waste your time, but this is the realities which we are fighting for. And I think all speakers during the presentations made the same statement, that we have to speak and we have to understand the realities together with the countries. And from this point of view, again, the conflict which had happened between Azerbaijan and Armenia just now is over. But the title of the conflict still exists. Former conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Even during the presentation, the respectable rapporteur said conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh. That's why I'm in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sadov. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Vardanyan wishes to speak against the amendment. He's online.
Against this amendment because we had a set of these similar amendments yesterday to be discussed. It is impossible to speak about the fact that there is no conflict because the conflict is still continuing, and the notion Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is an internationally recognized one. We use this wording for a long time, and we are still using this word in this organization. It is impossible to speak about the absence of the conflict when it exists in reality. So once again, I would like to say that we strongly against this amendment. And it was rejected by the two-thirds majority in the Specialized Monitoring Committee. Thank you.
I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And that amendment has been defeated. We move to amendment number 2, which was also one of those rejected by a 2/3 majority. I call Mr. Ciccovanni to support amendment 2. Is Mr. Ciccovanni in the room? Sorry. You have 1 minute, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The suggestion that we have provided is that the notion of the non-compliance with the international norms is something that is quite ambiguous, because there is no set of codified norms that is applied to any country, including those that are the members of this organization. At the same time, we do know that we're going to be preparing the country report that is going to be discussed within this hemicycle in a few months, whether it's going to be down the road during the next sessions. So we just wanted to make sure that the conclusions are not drawn based on general assumptions, but rather in a detailed discussion that we're going to have later on. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Khan. Mr. Khan, also online.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Je voudrais m'exprimer contre cet amendement parce que si je comprends la position de Monsieur Ciccovanni, cet amendement remet quand même en cause notre rapport que nous présenterons mardi en commission. Donc, je m'exprime contre cet amendement.
The committee has rejected the amendments by a 2/3 majority, and I shall now put it to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed. I call for the result to be displayed. That amendment is rejected. Amendment number 4, also one of those rejected by a 2/3 majority. I call Ms. Magentieva to support Amendment 4. Is she doing this in the chamber or remotely? She doesn't appear to be here. Mr. Bashkin, do you wish to? Mr. Sobolev. Mr. Sobolev. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment is just concrete words that we have in previous paragraph about the illegal annexation of Crimea. At the part when we describe the elections in Russian Federation, we say about the illegal elections on the territory of Crimea that were organized during the last elections. We want to support this amendment because it's a reality. And in previous our resolutions, we have this as the fact. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak against this amendment? I think we have Mr. Bashkin online. Mr. Bashkin?
Председатель. В поправке отсутствуют правомочные основания. На территории части Донецкой и Луганской областей в зоне конфликта живет большое количество граждан Российской Федерации. Голосовать на территории Украины технической возможности у них нет, поэтому граждане для участия в выборах перемещались на ближайшую к месту проживания российскую территорию, то есть Ростовскую область. И заявление о паспортизации тоже юридически безграмотно. На самом деле нам известны факты удовлетворенных заявлений о вступлении в российское гражданство жителей зоны конфликта. Они считают это единственным способом защитить свою жизнь от угрозы со стороны украинских военных и националистов. Насчет голосования на территории Крыма не зафиксировано ни одного факта массовых нарушений при проведении выборов. Возможно, мелкие были, но они не повлияли, по мнению наблюдателей и избирательной комиссии, на результаты волеизъявления жителей Крыма. Прошу отклонить.
Thank you. The committee has rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority, so I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And that amendment has been rejected. Amendment number 5. This was one that was adopted unanimously. I call, is it Mr. Sadov who is speaking to this? Yes? Oh, Mr. Subalev. I apologize. I apologize.
Yes, really, this amendment was adopted unanimously. The only thing that you can see in this amendment is to withdraw troops as soon as possible from the territories near the borders of Ukraine. Now we have more than 130,000 of Russian troops. As you remember, in previous our declaration, we have the same words that was supported, and so we want these words to be supported just in this resolution as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? And I think we have Mr. Bashkin still online.
Спасибо. Ассамблея не выражает же озабоченность о перемещении немецких, венгерских, итальянских войск по своим национальным территориям. И абсолютно правильно. Потому что расположение армии в любой части территории – это суверенное право любого государства, если это не ограничено конкретным договором. Кроме того, авторы поправок не предъявили Ассамблее ни одного технического доказательства, собранного с помощью средств контроля. Источником этой информации в основном являются сообщения СМИ, чье влияние в условиях кризиса мы обсуждали 2 дня назад. И куда Ассамблея призывает поправки вывести войска, если они никуда не вводились? Озабоченность стоит выразить концентрацией украинского тяжелого вооружения в зоне конфликта, что является прямым нарушением Минского соглашения. Но это предмет отдельного разговора. Просим отклонить поправку как основанную на ненадлежащих мотивах. Спасибо.
Thank you. Mr. Fassino, the committee is clearly in favor, yes?
La Commission, il est contraire à ces amendements.
No, no, no. This is amendment number 5.
Ah non, 5, non, excuse-me. Non. L'amendement 5 a été approuvé à l'unanimité par la Commission.
Thank you. Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. And that amendment has been adopted. We now move to amendment number 6, which was rejected by a two-thirds majority. Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to withdraw this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. The amendment has been withdrawn. Amendment number 8, which was one that was rejected by a two-thirds majority. I call Mr. Kislyak to support Amendment 8. Mr. Bashkin is doing this. Okay, Mr. Bashkin, your turn again. You have 1 minute.
Спасибо. закрытие оппозиционных средств массовой информации, преследование журналистов и оппозиционных политиков в Украине – это известные факты. Свобода мысли и свобода выражения мнения гарантированы статьями 9 и 10 Европейской конвенции по правам человека, и поэтому являются основными правами, защиту которых осуществляет Ассамблея. Это не вопрос отношений между Украиной и Россией. Это полагает позиция на все организации. Обязательства членов Совета Европы должны исполняться одинаково всеми, вне зависимости от каких-либо взаимных претензий или иных условий. И если мы требуем от всех стран-участниц Совета Европы исполнения конвенции, то почему отдельная страна должна быть исключением? Прошу поддержать поправку. Спасибо.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Anyone online? No? Then I understand the committee has rejected the amendment by a 2/3 majority. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Facino. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. And that amendment has been rejected. Amendment number 9, which was another rejected by a 2/3 majority, and I call Mr. Bishkin again to support Amendment 9. You have 1 minute.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Коллеги, поправка имеет расширительное значение. Хотя этот фрагмент текста доклада касается журналистов, но мы считаем, что полное и прозрачное расследование всех случаев насилия необходимо проводить в отношении всех граждан, а не только журналистов, так как касается общечеловеческих прав и свобод. Поэтому мы просим поправку поддержать. Спасибо.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Subelyev.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really, this chapter of the report is about the violence against journalists. And to investigate all these cases, it's an obligation of Ukraine, and it's a control under the whole control of international organizations. In the amendment, it's another item. It's about all violence on this territory, the territory of the war. I think it's not the item of this discussion. So I am against, and I want to be the same first text that we have now according to this draft. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Facino, the committee has rejected the amendment by a 2/3 majority, yes? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now both open. I call for, the vote is now closed, so I call for the result to be displayed. And that amendment has been rejected. Amendment number 7, I call Mr. Subelyev. Is it you again, sir, to support the amendment 7?
Thank you. This amendment is about the Crimea platform. It's really a new organized platform where the only place we can discuss the situation in Crimea, because no Minsk agreements, no Normandy format have this discussion. Just now, We have 49 countries and different international organizations that supported this platform. So we want to have this in the report. This amendment was supported totally by the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Bashkin? No, Mr. Bashkin has gone. So, Mr. Fassino, what is the opinion of the committee on the amendment?
L'amendement a été approuvé à large majorité.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote.
Approved.
Maybe you wanted to speak against.
I cannot take a point of order in the middle of a vote. We must complete this vote first of all. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed. I call for the result to be displayed. And that amendment has been approved. I will now take Mr. Bashkin's point of order.
Помочь Украине понять всю антидемократичность и языковых законов, которая осложняет изучение и использование на территории Украины. Коллеги, если по порядку выступления,
Mr. Bashkin, that is not a point of order. We are just moving on to amendment number 10. Will you please leave the floor? We are just moving on to amendment number 10.
Я делал запрос на выступление по поправке номер 7.
You may have made a request, but I am refusing that request at the moment until I have introduced amendment number 10. I'm now about to introduce amendment number 10, which was an amendment rejected by a two-thirds majority. Mr. Bashkin, now you have the chance to support amendment 10. You have 1 minute.
Уважаемые коллеги, я хочу представить 10-ю поправку. Мы просим Ассамблею таким образом помочь Украине понять всю антидемократичность ее языковых законов, которые осложняют изучение, использование на территории Украины венгерского, русского, румынского, польского и других языков национальных меньшинств. Озабоченность нарушением языковых прав граждан Украины уже проявилась в назначении доклада Ассамблеи по этому вопросу. Но это предмет будет отдельного разбирательства. А пока этой поправкой мы должны дать Украине сигнал о необходимости начать работу по приведению своих законов в соответствии с нормами и ценностями современного демократического европейского государства. Спасибо.
Mr. Subelin.
Thank you. Now it's a war on the territory of Ukraine. And it's not a problem of Russian-speaking, Ukrainian-speaking, or Crimea Tatar-speaking population that they are suffering because of the war. The war has no nationality. During the aggression, there were killed a lot of people of Russian, Ukrainian, Crimea Tatar, and other nationalities. I think it's not objective to put this in this paragraph. So I am against this. Thank you.
Thank you. The committee has rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I understand, Mr. Fassino?
Yes.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. That amendment has been rejected. I now move on to amendment number 11, and I call again Mr. Bishkin to support amendment 11. You again have 1 minute.
На сегодняшний день только Минские соглашения признаны мировым сообществом единственным инструментом прекращения гражданской войны на Украине и, как следствие, прекращения жертв с обеих сторон украинского конфликта. Начало реализации Украины подписанных ею Минских соглашений, которые она до сих пор не выполняет, это путь к прекращению нарушений основных прав и свобод человека на территории европейского государства. Ассамблея должна использовать все возможности для того, чтобы приблизить и ускорить этот процесс. Поддержка нашей поправки, то есть призыв вернуться к исполнению взятых на себя правовых обязательств, это один из таких шагов. Просим поправку поддержать. Спасибо.
Thank you. Mr. Subalov.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Minsk agreement, it's agreement. It means there are different sides of this agreement. It's impossible to have one side to fulfill everything if all other sides are not fulfilling this. More than, for the last 6 years, a special law about some regions of Lugansk and Donetsk territory are still in the parliament. Each year, 6 last years, we provide this law to the life. But it's impossible to do this because other side is not fulfilling Minsk agreements. And the last, it's not a Ukrainian conflict. It's the aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine. And we have this in all our reports and declarations. So we are against this, especially against the last phrase. Read it. It's something unrealistic when the country aggressor say about this. Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Fassino, the committee has rejected the amendments by a 2/3 majority. Thank you. I shall now
rejected.
Thank you. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 11 is rejected. We now move to what I think is the last amendment, amendment number 3, which is again one of those rejected by a 2/3 majority, and I call Mr. Ivanov to support the amendment. Mr. Ivanov online? Yes? Good.
Yes, hello. We call for the cancelling of the last part of the last language on the part concerning the Republic of North Macedonia. It makes a link between the position of Bulgaria in the negotiations for the accession of North Macedonia to the European Union and the political processes internally in Macedonia. Obviously, this cannot be objective. It drags the Council of Europe in the position of making inobjective judgments, and we think this is not going to be constructive given the very positive new signals that the new governments in Sofia and Skopje are giving. Let's not be negative and judgmental in this way.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I cannot see anyone in the hemicycle. There's nobody online. Okay, the committee has rejected the amendments by a 2/3 majority. Yes. I shall now put the amendment
Yes,
to
rejected.
Thank you, Mr. Fassino. I shall now put the amendment to the vote, and the vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. The vote is now closed. Can I call for the result to be displayed, please? And that amendment has been rejected. We now move to the question of the draft resolution, for which a simple majority is required. So we will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution that is contained in document 15433 as amended. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting are now open. Yeah. The vote is now closed. Can I call for the result to be displayed? And the draft resolution in document 15433 is adopted. Thank you all very much for that. We now move on, but I think we now move on to the free debate. And this is where I hand back the chair. Thank you all very much indeed.
Good morning again, dear colleagues. We now come to the free debate. I remind members that this debate is not for topic, it's for topic not already on the agenda agreed on Monday morning. Speaking time will be limited to 3 minutes. I call for Mr. Seyidov from the Conservative Group. You have 3 minutes, and please start by identifying the topic you wish to raise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, dear friends, during all this session, I have done my best in order to explain that in our region, we have really new situation. And it's really very good that my president just recently said that we are able to get some positive signals from Armenia. It means the reconciliation process is going on in the region, which is an essential one. 3 very important topics which we are dealt with. The first one is a peaceful treaty with Armenia. The second one is a delimitation and demarcation of the borders. And the third one is an opening of communication with Armenia and all communications in the region. That's really very good that with the third question, I mean opening of communications with Armenia, we got some progress about the Zangezur corridor, about railway and automobile way connections between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And I hope we'll be able to have an access, direct access to Nakhchivan, which is unfortunately during 30 years have been blockaded. Positive signals we got about the communications between Turkey and Armenia, which is also very good, because for a long period of time, because of occupation of Azerbaijani territories, there was no any connections and relations between Armenia and Turkey. About delimitation and demarcation, also we got some positive information, but the question is that Armenia is ready to come to negotiate this question with some preconditions. Friends, all questions can be and should be discussed. But taking into account these very, very painful questions, we should sit together without any kind of precondition in order to understand each other, in order to explain the realities to each other. And that's why we are in favor of negotiations and to sitting together without any kind of preconditions. And the third one, peaceful treaty, sustainable peace in the region. Unfortunately, we got some signals from Armenia that again they are ready to do that, but with some kind of preconditions. Friends, colleagues, if you have some preconditions, please explain it or present it during the negotiations. Come to the table, sit together with Azerbaijan, and this is only one way to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Saidov. And now I'll give the floor to Mr. Jensen from the ALDE group. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair. And on behalf of the ALDE group, I would like to touch upon the issue regarding Russia's decision to close down the oldest NGO in that country, Memorial. We from the ALDE group are very, very worried about the decrease in democracy and also making it more and more difficult for NGOs to work in Russia. Memorial were a completely independent NGO that focused a lot on the shortcomings that there are in Russia under especially the current government. And that's all you can reason why the government decided to close down Memorial is, of course, because they were irritated by the repeated demand that Russia move in a more democratic way, particularly in the light that Russia, especially in the last few years, have actually moved in the opposite direction in a more authoritarian way. We, in the discussion we just had a discussion about should country be under monitoring or not, should we have a more thematic monitoring. This is precisely the reason why we need country monitoring. Because we now have a huge country, the biggest member of our organization, that are disregarding any minimum standards that we as an organization have. And therefore, we also have to take into account, and that is what kind of demands we as an organization put forward on our members. Do we just say, okay, we will need to talk about it and have this endless discussions on discussions? Or do we also say that decisions have actually, we have to take into action what kind of decisions that are being put forward from the government in our member countries. And in light of the closing of Memorial, we can only speculate that a lot of the few remaining NGOs that are still in Russia, the few independent remaining NGOs, will now be even more hindered in their work. And therefore, we call upon this assembly to actually raise this issue again and again, so we can make sure that the many, many citizens of Russia that want to be part of European values and ideas are not being removed that opportunity. So that is what we from the ALDE group believe are most important. And we also call upon the government in Russia to make sure that independent NGOs are still able to work in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. And in the debate, I call next Ms. Boyland from the Unified European Left. You have the floor.
Thank you. And this morning I would like to raise the right to a clean, safe and healthy and sustainable environment, which is recognised by the Council of Europe and the United Nations. There's been much work done calling for binding rules, and last year the former PACE president launched the initiative Environment Right Now. We know that we're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis and as well as a climate emergency. And too often the two crises are conflated, because we know that biodiversity is exacerbated by climate change, but it is caused by decades of ecocide committed by governments and large corporations. Deforestation, deep sea mining, oil spills, fracking and plastic pollution are destroying the ecosystems and denying communities their right to a clean, safe and healthy environment. And for too long, those responsible have not been held accountable. Financial penalties are budgeted into corporations' balance sheets, and corporations use their deep pockets to pursue states in corporate courts and to prevent tighter environmental regulations. They also use their financial might to pursue and destroy those who seek to expose their environmental crimes. And we only have to look at the case of Stephen Donziger. Donziger is an environmental lawyer who represented farmers and indigenous Ecuadorian communities against the Chevron oil company. And he's now being pursued relentlessly by Chevron and is currently under house arrest in New York. The only way that we can ensure that corporations who commit ecocide are truly held accountable is to make ecocide an international crime and an arrestable offence. A law on ecocide would signal the end of corporate or government immunity. And in June last year, legal experts from across the globe drafted up a historic definition of ecocide. And this definition defines it as unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there is a substantial likelihood of severe and widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. By making ecocide a crime, it would not only uphold the right to a clean environment, but it would also shift the dominant mindset of anthropocentrism that exists particularly in Western cultures, including Europe. We must move away from the idea that we can control ecosystems and accept that we are dependent on the natural world for our well-being. And I would hope that in the future at the Council of Europe, we could have debates and progress the campaign to make ecocide a crime, in addition to the Council of Europe's initiative, which is the Environmental Right Now initiative.
Thank you, Ms. Boyland. And in the debate, I call next Mr. Holden from the United Kingdom. Yeah, Mr. Holden, you have to request the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, we've heard from some very interesting topics already in the free session today, covering massive international issues. But a lot of these have been on relatively divisive issues, I'd suggest, particularly around Ukraine and Russia. What I wanted to talk about is something that I hope will unite us all across the European Council of Europe, from all our different traditions. And it's something that I've been pursuing here in the UK Parliament recently. And that's a calls to ban hymenoplasty and virginity testing. It's often thought that the rights of women have been, we've already moved on from that, and they're already there. but I think it's quite clear that that's not the case. We have shared values and shared human rights across the European Union, across the Council of Europe and the Council of Europe area. But currently, some of these rights aren't particularly relating to women, have not been pursued to the level that we need to get them to. And it seems to me that we're still allowing, in many instances, women to be treated as second-class citizens and valued not on who they are, but on what they can provide to others. So one of the things I would like to see us all working together is a Europe-wide ban on virginity testing and hymenoplasty. The World Health Organization have already spoken out about the impact that these measures can have on women, both psychological and physical. And those have been heard here in the United Kingdom, and we're seeing that legislation go through Parliament now. But I think it's something that we need to look at on a greater Europe-wide basis. I'd also extend that to, which I know is a Council of Europe position, on increasing the age of marriage to 18 across the board. It's something that here in England and Wales, one of my colleagues is putting forwards now, a measure to help to ensure that only adults can make those difficult and important life-changing decisions for themselves and their futures. And I think that's something that those are two steps that on a pan-European basis, hopefully we can all come together on to ensure that the rights of women are still being pushed, because the boundaries at the moment just are not strong enough to protect all those who need it across Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. And in the debate, I call next Mr. Hosseina from Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, one of the first working day of January 2022 was declared the year of Shusha by the order of the President of Azerbaijan. This is not just a calendar event. It is not just a matter of one country. This topic has a deep social, political, and economic, and of course, historical and spiritual sense. Shusha has always been a place of particular value for Azerbaijanis, and this city, founded 270 years ago by the great commander and statesman Panahi Ali Khan, has always been a symbol of Karabakh. The people of Azerbaijan, who liberated during the 44-day war in 2020 the territories occupied for 30 years, gained a new official holiday called Victory Day, which will be celebrated on November 8th every year. November 8th was not the day of the war ended. On this day, the occupation of Shusha ended. However, the liberation of the symbolic city of Shusha signified for the Azerbaijanis the end of the occupation of Karabakh, and ultimately it happened. This event proves once again that Shusha is not just a city, but a symbolic city, a key city, a symbol of the whole Karabakh. Today, Shusha and Karabakh look like a huge construction site. In general, work is going on here day and night. Such a pace of work is inevitable in order to give new life to the territories destroyed over 3 decades in a short time, to create favorable conditions for the return of internally displaced persons who have been eager to get back here for 30 years. In August 2021, I was in those occupied territories. Territories that have been so brutally destroyed can be created solely after the worst nuclear wars. However, there were no battles in those areas at that time, and the population was not forcibly expelled from there. It is as if the occupiers have been fighting alone on these lands for 30 years. During the years of occupation of these lands, severe fires broke out every year. This was no coincidence. Trucks were regularly calculated there, along with the forming the training camps for terrorists from different countries. These deeds, which took place outside of any international control, ended with the burning of the territories after the harvest. Now a completely different picture comes to life here. The lands of Azerbaijan liberated from occupation are also becoming a platform for international economic relations and cooperation. Thus, the year of Shusha in Azerbaijan will always be one of the brightest response to the dilemma of peace or war, cooperation of confrontation, which always ends in favor of the former. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Husseinov. And in the debate, I call next Ms. Butina from the Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Уважаемые члены ПАСЕ, кроме Государственной Думы, я помогаю гражданам России, которые подверглись уголовному преследованию за рубежом. Это политзаключенные. К сожалению, они есть и в Европе. Знаю, что такое быть обвиненным без вины по политическим мотивам. 1,5 года я провела в тюрьме в США за преступление, которого не совершала. То, что я женщина, россиянка, было использовано против меня. Меня оболгали, лишили свободы, издевались, держали как террористку, в лекарствах, подвергали постоянным унизительным обыскам с раздеванием. Решением суда запретили защищать себя в СМИ. Прокуратура в итоге признала, что я не являлась российским шпионом, но меня осудили, заставили признать вину, отправили в тюрьму. Так я стала жертвой русофобии, очередной жертвой. Тяжело осознавать 76 лет спустя после победы над фашизмом, что в мире продолжают преследовать людей по национальному признаку. В первые дни заключения в тюремной камере на клочке бумаги я написала обращение мировому сообществу. Возрождение нацизма недопустимо. Одумайтесь. Но оно исчезло. Никто, нигде, никогда его не напечатал. Теперь, пользуясь трибуной ПАСЕ, наконец могу сказать всему миру. Преследование людей за национальность снова наша реальность. Мой случай не единственный. Европейская конвенция по правам человека запрещает преследование людей по признаку национальности. На деле это не так. Наглядный пример — приговор литовского суда россиянину Константину Никулину. Он 14 лет в тюрьме. Его осудили пожизненно, без доказательств, на предположении о его возможном участии. Нужно было обвинить русских. Реальные виновные неинтересны. У человека забрали жизнь. Он обратился в ЕСПЧ еще в 2019 году, но дело постоянно без основания откладывают. Еще пример. Юрий Мель. В Уголовном кодексе Литвы в нарушении норм европейского права есть законы обратной силы. Это касается так называемых преступлений против человечности, политических дел времен развала Советского Союза, где советских солдат судят как нацистских преступников. Мель 7 лет находится в тюрьме без приговора, хотя по нормам Евросоюза это запрещено. Во время беспорядков в январе 1991 года в Литве Мель командовал танком. Никто не был убит или ранен вследствие действий Юрия. Для прокуратуры Литвы это не имеет значения. Русский значит враг. Через 7 лет приговор вынесли и добавили еще 3 года тюрьмы. Таких примеров десятки в разных странах Европы. В нашей с вами Европе, серьезно, будем честны, этих людей посадили не за уголовное преступление, а за национальность и гражданство, как это было в 30-40-х годах прошлого века. И в каком направлении мы движемся? Политические приговоры в отношении россиян становятся правилом. Призываю вас прекратить русофобию, как и любое преследование по национальному признаку в Европе. Это путь в никуда. Спасибо большое.
Thank you, Ms. Butina. And in the debate, I call next Mr. Bardanian from Armenia. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 1 year after the aggressive war against Nagorno-Karabakh launched by Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey, and with the engagement of unprecedented number of mercenaries, we are still trying to resolve the conflict by exclusively peaceful means, with a clear understanding that peaceful solutions have no alternatives, and it is a general obligation of all the parties under the UN Charter, and it is also obligation for Armenia and Azerbaijan as an imperative, a condition for the membership of this respective organization. Unfortunately, in September 2020, this obligation was broken by Azerbaijan, led to the war, deaths, casualties, and other suffering of people. November 9 trilateral statement allowed to stop this international outrage, and due to the involvement of Russian peacekeepers, the relative peace is maintained. But many provisions of trilateral statement are not fulfilled by Azerbaijan up to date. In particular, despite the precise obligation under the Geneva Convention on Trilateral Statement, Armenian POWs as well as other captives are still non-repatriated. Some of them are even convicted in the orchestrated snap trials. And you know for what we are convicted? For just being Armenians. Ladies and gentlemen, it's pity, but I have to say that among our member states, there is a country where being an Armenian is a crime. The Armenians are dehumanized, we are demonized, and their very physical existence is endangered under the territory of Azerbaijani control. Armenian cultural heritage is deliberately destroyed under Azerbaijani control areas. Is it victory? Is it corresponding to the international standards? Is it corresponding to the standards of the Council of Europe? Addressing Armenia-Azerbaijan relations, Mr. Saidov says, I would like to stress, answering him, that Mr. Saidov, we are always in favor of normalization of relations. We are in favor of discussing the limitation and demarcation issues. We are for deblocking all communications, but let's be very fair with each other. No Zangezur corridor exists, no corridor logic is discussed either. I would like just to say, ladies and gentlemen, that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict emerged even before the Armenia and Azerbaijan got independence. Why I decided to speak on this occasion here? Because unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, today here we have even more alarming developments in this same cycle. Since Azerbaijan now trying to erase the very notion Nagorno-Karabakh from each and every place. I'm here to say, and say it very loudly, that Nagorno-Karabakh exists. The people of Nagorno-Karabakh with its unalienable collective rights exists, and denial of their existence is denial of human rights and denial of democratic values and international law principles. And last but not the least, unfortunately, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is still unresolved, and this is reality. And it should be solved in the framework of OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship in accordance with the norms and principles of general international law. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bardanian. And in the debate I call next, Mr. Mamikhanyan from Armenia, too. Mr. Mamikhanyan, you need to request the floor, please. Okay, then, so we will move to the next speaker, and in the debate I call next, Mr. Sidali from Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We all know George Orwell's famous dystopia 1984. Much more of what is in the book is being done by the Chinese authorities against the Uyghur Turks today. Big Brother's eye sees every city, every neighborhood, wherever they live. You might think it is exaggerated. I'll give you a few examples. Speaking their mother's tongue is forbidden even in schools where only Uyghurs attend. Students are monitored with microphones in classrooms. A warning is given at first time and a penalty at the second. Since late 90s, Uyghur language has been systematically removed from being the language of education. There is also serious pressure on freedom of religion and belief. There are ID reading devices at the entrance of mosques and cameras inside. They ban civil servants, workers in industry, service, business sectors, students, teachers, and women from going to mosques. Worst of all, Chinese men are placed in homes of Uyghur women whose spouses are in concentration camps or prisons. Uyghurs have no right to oppose to this exercise. Those who oppose are sent to concentration camps. With this inhuman practice, China ignores the privacy of private life, family privacy, and women's rights. China aims to forcibly remove Uyghur identity and replace it with something else. It is much more than 1984, isn't it? Concerns become fears, fiction becomes reality. The China Uyghur Autonomous Region Human Rights Report was published in 4 different languages by E-Party at December 10th last year at World Human Rights Day. In this report, we have described the concentration camps which the Chinese government denied for years, but had to accept due to the documents and witnesses that emerged afterwards, where millions of Uyghurs are currently held captive. Although the Chinese government describes these camps as vocational training and re-education camps, these are simply assimilation camps. In 2019, we gave in this hemisphere Václav Havel Human Rights Award to Uyghur Turk academician and activist İlham Tohti. In fact, with this award, we made a promise to all Uyghurs. We declared that we are against the human tragedy they are going through. What happened after 2 years? Mr. Tohti is still in prison according to Chinese authorities' declarations. As PACE, we cannot remain silent any longer. Before it's too late, we must consider all necessary options. Uyghurs live their pain far away from Strasbourg. The question is, do they live far away from our consciences too? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sidali. And in the debate, I call next Misuka from Turkey.
Ja, vielen
We can hear you. Can you switch on the
Okay, vielen Dank,
okay, now.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ich möchte mich bei Ihnen alle recht herzlich bedanken. Ich möchte gerne heute zu einem Thema, der mir sehr am Herzen liegt, mit Ihnen Ihnen das vortragen. Ich möchte gerne heute über die Jesiden sprechen, über Sinjar. Die Jesiden wurden am 3. August 2014 von dem Islamischen Staat, der IS, angegriffen. Am 3. August 2014 wurde ein Massaker gegenüber den Jesiden durchgeführt. Hunderttausende von Menschen wurden zu Flüchtlingen, wurden vertrieben. Tausende von jesidischen Frauen und Kindern sind in den Händen der IS gefallen. Und diese Frauen und Kinder, über 7000, sind auf verschiedene Basaren verkauft worden. Heute sehen wir auch, dass diese Frauen in verschiedenen Ländern auftauchen und verkauft worden sind. Über 100 Massengräber sind entdeckt worden im Sinjar, im Schengal. Und heute noch von den 7000 verschwundenen Frauen sind in etwa 2800 Frauen immer noch verschwunden. Vor den Augen der Medien und der internationalen Gemeinschaft wurde dieses Massaker gegenüber den Jesiden geführt. Die Menschen in Sinjar, im Schengal, die das Verbrechen gegen die Menschen in Sinjar, die den Verbrechen gegen die Menschlichkeit ausgesetzt waren, sind in ihrem Land zurückgekehrt, um sich ein neues Leben aufzubauen. Und während sie ihre Selbstverteidigungseinheiten gebildet haben, Frauenräte aufgebaut haben und wieder das neue Leben im Sinjar angefangen hat, sind sie den Luftangriffen der Türkei ausgesetzt worden. Immer wieder türkische Killerdrohnen bombardieren die Selbstverteidigungseinheiten der Jesiden, auch Krankenhäuser wurden bombardiert und viele Zivilisten wurden zum Opfer. Es gab nie eine Bedrohung der Jesiden gegen die Türkei. Jesiden haben nie die Türkei angegriffen. Aber was wollt ihr von den Jesiden? Überlebende des Jesiden-Genozids haben das Recht zu leben und ihre Heimat wieder aufzubauen. Und das Mindeste, was die internationale Gemeinschaft tun kann, ist sie von Luftangriffen zu schützen. Deswegen fordere ich eine No-Flight-Zone für Schengal. Herr Vorsitzende, gerade nach Sinjar haben wir auch gesehen, dass diese IS-Angriffe auf Kobane, heute auch in Rojava, in Haseki fortgeführt werden. Und gerade in den letzten Tagen gab es einen Massenausbruchversuch aus der Haftanstalt. wo ausländische IS-Gefangene sind, über 5000. Und das hat gezeigt, dass es versteckte Machtzentren geben, die sie unterstützt haben. Auch bei den IS-Kämpfern wurden Waffen, Ursprungs NATO-Waffen entdeckt. Und diese Frage möchte ich gerne hier stellen. Was haben NATO-Waffen in den Händen der IS in Rojava zu suchen? Deswegen bitte ich, das nochmal zu bearbeiten. Es ist die Verantwortung für uns alle, sich mit dieser Frage auseinanderzusetzen. Gestern war es Schengal, heute ist Kobane. Die gesamte Welt ist davon bedroht. Und das wollte ich gerne hier nochmal zur Aussage bringen. Dankeschön.
Danke sehr, Frau Uka, liebe Fleckners. Sie waren die letzte Sprecherin in dieser Debatte. The debate now is closed, and I thank all the contributors to this free debate, which is an essential part of our session week. Our next business is to consider the changes proposed by in the membership of committees. These are set out in document Commission's 2022 number 1, addendum 2. Are the proposed changes in the memberships of the committees agreed to? I do not see any objections, so they are agreed to. We now will turn to the progress report of the Bureau. This morning, the Bureau has proposed several references to committees. They are set out in progress report document number 15449, addendum number 4. These references must be submitted for ratification by the Assembly in accordance with Rule 26(3) of the rules. Are there any objections against these references? I do not see any. Therefore, they are approved. I now propose that the other decisions in the progress report, which is document 15449, addendum number 4, are to be ratified. Any objections? I do not see any. They are approved. Next business today is to constitute the Standing Committee. The membership of the Standing Committee is fixed by Rule 17(3) as follows: the President of the Assembly, the Vice Presidents of the Assembly, the leaders of the political groups, the chairpersons of the national delegations, and the chairpersons of the general committees. A full list is set out in document Commissions 2022-02. The Standing Committee is accordingly constituted. Dear colleagues, we now have come to the end of our business. I would like to thank all the members of the Assembly, and particularly the rapporteurs and the chairpersons for their hard work, but all the members who participated in all the debates that we had this week and in the work of our committees, who are so important for us. I also would like to thank all the vice presidents who have assisted me by presiding over sittings of the Assembly this week. They are Mr. Antonio Guterres Limones, Mr. John Howell, Madam Ria Oomruijten, Madam Inge Schouw, Madam Nicole Tries, Madam Maya Vukovic, and Mr. Ahmed Yildiz. In addition, I would like to thank the staff and the interpreters, both permanent and temporary, who have worked so hard to make the part session a success. I would also like to thank the technicians who have made our hybrid proceedings possible. I wish all those who got ill, who got contaminated by COVID, a quick recovery, because we need you all, people working for us, to make the next part session a success, and that next part session will be held from the 25th of April to the 29th of April. Those who are more experts over here know that at the end of the sitting I should give the extra compliments to those who participated most in the debates and the votes, but that is undoable with people being here and being online, because it's easy to be online and to say I participated the whole week. We cannot check that. So we come back to that good custom when we are meeting here in a complete physical performance, then we will also have the prizes for the number of attendances. I see that Madam Vleckners-Uka wants to take the floor for a point of order, I assume, Vleckners.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Ich möchte nur also für das Protokoll zur Kenntnisnahme bei der letzten Abstimmung im Amendment 7 ist ein Fehler habe ich einen Fehler gemacht. Ich wollte statt Nein, habe ich aus Versehen mit Ja abgestimmt. Ich konnte das nicht umändern. Ich bitte, das bitte nochmal im Protokoll aufzunehmen. Statt Ja wollte ich mit Nein stimmen. Dankeschön.
Dank sehr, Frau Uka. We take note of that. You know, it does not change the results of the vote, but it's clear that you made a mistake, and it's good that you announced that. We now have come to the end of our business. I declare the first past session of 2022 session of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe closed. The sitting is closed.
Congratulations, Mr. President.